Hey everybody, Asher here, and it's Whispers of the Old Gods time. So today we're going to do one of Hearthstone players' favorite activities, which is arranging things in tier lists, or specifically making a tier list for the classes in standard mode of Hearthstone. Now keep in mind, for those of you who do not know, there are two modes coming with the most recent patch and with Whispers of the Old Gods. Wild, which is all the cards that are available, and then Standard, which is everything except for Naxx and Goblins versus Gnomes. So there's a lot of changes. And between the nerfs, those changes, and the new cards, we're going to have a pretty shook up metagame. So I'm going to go over not just what 9 classes I think are going to be, how they're going to do, what order they're going to be in. I hope I'm making sense. But we are also going to talk about why. Because it's not enough just for me to put a list. But I'm going to do these in order from top to bottom. So what is the number 1 class? That would be, in my opinion, Warrior. Ooh, that's a real big deal to a point that Warrior lost Death's Bite. Warrior loses Shield Maid, and those are some pretty dang good cards. However, if you look at the Warrior archetypes, they're probably still going to survive. Patron Warrior has actually survived some significant nerfs already. And the Grim Patron mechanic is really strong to the point where even if whether it's something like Blood to Ichor or something else, I suspect that Patron Warrior is still going to be around. Then you have the control and different variants of whether it's Fatigue Warrior, which is to a lesser extent Elise Warrior, possibly even Cthulhu Warrior. Now, Warrior itself doesn't necessarily have the best Cthulhu cards out there in terms of buffing Cthulhu, but it has some of the best tools for surviving so that you can play other cards to get your Cthulhu out. It's not going to be a class that necessarily relies on Cthulhu to be your win condition, but if you can play into buffing up your Cthulhu, it's going to be a good show. So while the loss of Death's Bite, I apologize there, for the loss of Death's Bite and everything, you do have Malcroak, which is a very good legendary, and you do have some interesting pirate synergy. I've heard some people bounce around Face Warrior, which is probably always going to be there, but not necessarily stronger, consistent deck. But Warrior number 1, at least in my opinion, which goes to number 2 in a big shakeup, but not necessarily one that's going to surprise a lot of people who've been paying attention. Shaman, number 2 on the list. It gains the most based on what other classes lost. If you look at the card list for what Shamans actually played in terms of what they lose in the transition to standard format, which is the focus of this video, Crackle. Okay, Crackle, it sucks. You do have a spell that replaces it. It only targets minion, but if you want to go face a Shaman, you lose that direct damage. But I think while face Shaman is going to survive and is going to possibly do pretty well, given that there's a lot of healings and sustainability that's going to be leaving the standard meta, what you also get is some very interesting new cards that are possibly going to make a mid-rangier, control-y, or tempo-oriented Shaman viable, especially in terms of Evolve, which I had a few people call me out on, probably rightfully so, on my top 10 list for not including it in there. And there's actually a lot of good Shaman cards in this set. I advise you to take a look, but I think in terms of what Shaman lost relative to what everyone else lost, Shaman's probably going to be the most familiar. And look out, Healing Wave may actually be played a lot more, given that we don't have Healbot and things like that for neutral heals as much anymore. Next on the list, and these next classes are probably a little bit of a rung down from Shaman and Warrior, in my opinion. But the next one on this list is Mage. Mage, the old standby. If you look at the classic and basic sets, there's a reason that Mage tends to do well in Arena. A lot of its core cards that appear all the time in drafts are good, and a lot of those aren't going away. Despite the loss of, and I keep wanting to call it Secret Keeper for some reason, despite the loss of Mad Scientist, Freeze Mage is going to survive. Other mages are going to survive. You do have Kir and Tor to help push out some secrets if it fits into the deck. But where Mage shines to a point is that spell damage is still going to be able to control the board. You won't have esports portal, things like that, but Grinder Mage is still going to survive. You do have the Molten Giant nerfs and everything, but there's a lot of other cards that you can add in just because Mage is really good at freezing the board. Doomsayer is still going to be awesome. Doomsayer, one of the cards that can actually work really well against a lot of the 10 mana cards that came in here. And actually, one of the old standbys that people used to play all the time in Mage, but not so much for a long time, Polymorph, and to a lesser extent, Polymorph Boar, could both shine here. But another card to be on the lookout for as well as Shatter. I do think Mage is going to benefit from having some hard removal like that, especially when there's enough that they can freeze. So I do think Mage is in a decent spot. It's going to still look fairly familiar, but they can still curve out really hard and play spells discounted with the Sorcerer's Apprentice. So it's going to remain pretty strong. Next on the list, and weighing in at number 4, is a class that's going to see some pretty substantial changes in the upcoming meta, and that's Warlock. Now, Zoo is always going to Zoo. It's an archetype that's been around since Standard and Basic, so that's not really going to change. But you do lose Void Caller. You do lose Dark Bomb. Even though he wasn't played as much lately, Mal'Ganis is also out of the picture, so sorry, Dredgesteed, My Little Pony decks. You're probably dead. But this is another set where Warlock did not gain as much in return. Cho'Gall has some potential, but what would you play him in? Something like Handlock, and Handlock without being able to make, or having to dig in really deep into the health pool to make Molten Giant plays, is going to have some serious problems. Now, that's not to say Handlock won't exist, because you do have the nerfs to Ironbeak Owl, you have the nerf to Keeper of the Grove, you have the nerf to Big Game Hunter. That makes Handlock's turn 4 pretty spectacular, potentially, between Drake or Mountain Giant. However, it's the later game. It's being able to survive that early rush where Handlock can potentially run into problems. But it's a problem that can solve. In fact, the Reno Handlock is probably going to be just fine, considering all the cards that do come in, and that is a deck that more relies on your wherewithal, being able to read the situation, than necessarily saving up to make one huge play. I would say that although Warlock doesn't have as many Cthulhu cards, it could potentially be good because of its ability to dig into the deck. But where I'm excited for, probably where it's going to be at for Warlock more, is the Zoo orientation. And I know people love Zoo so much, but when you do have a card like Darkshire Councilman, which I'll be honest is my favorite card art in the whole set, that's just screaming Zoo. Also, and I'll just put this out here now, and we can revisit this later, you're going to hate Possessed Villager. Not just because of the sound file, but you're just going to hate his guts. We'll see. Number 5 on the list is Hunter, which has lost a lot. Mad Scientist leaving hurts. Web Spinner hurts. Glaive Zuka hurts. But still, I do think Face Hunter is going to survive. Firebat is going to be pretty good in it. And then you still have the Hero Power, which will always have your opponent on a clock. Plus, you lose. Everybody loses Sludge Belcher. Everybody loses Healbot. So other than Reno, most classes do not necessarily have a reliable way to heal through the potential burst that Hunter still has. So where is Hunter going to be from this time? I mean, Face is going to be there, especially when you have a lot of people experimenting early on in the expansion, trying to make inefficient decks, especially trying to make Cthulhu work. And so Hunter will be able to blast through that. I think mid-range is going to be able to do pretty good, kind of replacing out the Dr. Boom Big Slam at the end with Call of the Wild. It's one more mana, but it's a lot to put on your board all at once. And I do think that can work out. I do wonder as well if a standard N'Zoth Deathrattle Hunter could potentially work in more of a control-y shell. If you can make a control hunter go really, really, really slow. Now, I know N'Zoth is going to be ridiculously powerful and wild, but you do lose a lot of Deathrattle minions in standard. But still, you have Sylvanas, you have Savannah Highmanes. It could work if you can just live long enough to survive. So I guess the question is N'Zoth a win more card, or is it a win now card? Remains to be seen, but Hunter is definitely going to change. Flare is going to be good for punishing other classes because nobody has Mad Scientist anymore. So getting rid of those secrets could potentially be a really strong play, but I don't think Hunter necessarily has the card quality some of the other classes have to necessarily rise up super, super high in the ranks. Number 6 on the list is a class that some people are probably going to disagree with this ranking, and I could be very wrong. In fact, I have a feeling I may be underestimating this class a little bit, and that is Rogue. I do believe firmly that the death of Rogue has been overstated. A lot of people are confusing the bladeflurry nerf with the meta as a whole. Now, the bladeflurry nerf, that's not the right word, but the bladeflurry nerf sucks. It really does, but it doesn't kill Malarogue. And like I said before, I do think Tempo Rogue is going to make a huge comeback in this expansion. Rogue got a lot of good early cards. I even think, Yogg Saron is probably going to be best in Rogue, although it can play pretty well in other classes too. And Yogg Saron is a good card that you can kind of throw down at the end. It can maybe save your butt. It might fry you from time to time, but statistically, if you want to hold on to those numbers and not focus on game to game, but over a long enough period of games, Yogg Saron should have a net benefit for you. I mean, ideally. Let's trust in the old god, shall we? But I do think Rogue as a primarily spell class with some good, solid minions is going to do pretty well. I wonder if this will be the expansion with things like Sludge Belcher phasing out, if Shadowpen Rider's finally going to come through, because that is a potentially very strong card. It's a very good arena card, too, but it could potentially see more play in Constructed. Rogue also got, let's see here, good legendary. You always appreciate getting additional spells. Squidface could even be good if you manage to hold on to control to your weapon. So I'm putting Rogue down here, but I think of all the rankings, this is the one I'm least comfortable with, because I think I might be underestimating it. Feel free to tell me what you think. But after Rogue, I do see another kind of drop-off here between that and the remaining classes. So we can go ahead and get our tiny violins out for number 7, which is the Druid. And I'm just going to play this nice tune for Druid here. Combo is dead. Combo is dead. Long die combo. Well, I mean, it was fun for the years that it lasted, I guess. Now Druids will have to pay attention to 0 or reach 0 health instead of 14. But that aside, Token Druid may actually make a comeback here, and Force of Nature may actually be part of that revival. So take your 400 dust now and then recraft it later. I don't know. But Token Druid are always good before. You got to kind of look back to the decks before people were prominently using the combo a whole lot. Ramp Druid may be pretty good as well. The one issue with Ramp Druid, though, is going to be that you don't have your Swiss Army Knife Keeper of Lore. That nerf probably hurts more than the Force of Nature Savage Roar combo nerf, if only because you can't both ramp up your mana crystals and actually get more cards in your hand. So it's potentially easier to wash out early. But Ramp Druid is still one of those decks that can hold the board and get your opponent to 0 instead of 14. But another thing to look out for Druid, and this is where they could swing up pretty well, is Druid has, in my opinion, and I think a lot of people will agree with me here, has the strongest class cards for buffing Cthulhu. And between the taunts that are potentially available and between Fandral, Staghelm, I do think Druid could be a sneaky pick for probably having the best Cthulhu deck out there. So replace one Instagib combo with another, I don't know. But I do think Druid's in a place where it's going to be substantially different, but the old might be new again, which Whispers of the Old Gods, I guess that's the point of the expansion, isn't it? Now, number 8 on the list is probably the class that got hit the hardest. I feel like I've been saying that about everybody now. But I do think number 8, Paladin, got hit the hardest in terms of everything that it loses, in terms of its deck archetypes. I mean, when you look at Standard, the Golden Curve is no more. You don't have Minibot, you don't have Muster, you don't have Coghammer. Any Finn Paladins lose Old Merkeye. I mean, for those of you that don't know, you cannot have your promotional golden reward cards or anything like that, including Geblin Mechacorp, which I probably just mispronounced. But Old Merkeye is not going to be in any Finn, so while it is still a control deck that can potentially burst you down, it's not going to be as strong or as consistent as it used to be without that extra charge. You also have, I guess what's kind of coming into the fore here is that it seems like of the cards that survive for Paladin, we're looking at either one of two things are going to happen. We're going to have, apologies for that interruption there, but you may have midrange come back to a point, but midrange was not exactly a strong deck back in original Hearthstone, back in the old days. But what could potentially work, and this could be a long shot, but it could work, is Control Paladin. It kind of had a spike of power and influence at the beginning of the Grand Tournament. But Ragnaros Light Lord, of all things, and could be the healing that the class needs to get this in. I don't think all the Divine Shield and new card stuff is going to necessarily play out very well. Although you may see some weenie decks playing a lot of Divine Shields and throwing Blood Knights out there. So, welcome back. Card that I've never been able to get out of a single Hearthstone classic pack. Blood Knight, thank you. But I do think Control Paladin does have some potential. So does Deathrattle Paladin, possibly even with N'Zoth as well. I mean, if you can get a Tyrion out, if you can get a Sylvanas out, those could all work pretty well. It may be one of the two standard decks, other being Hunter, where N'Zoth may have a place. But once again, as a control deck that wants to last until a big play on turn 10, you've got to find a way to live. Paladin has the way to do that, but I have my doubts that it's going to be consistent enough to work out. So that's why I put Paladin really low. But not as low as my favorite class in Hearthstone, which it pains me to do this, but number 9 on the list is Priest. Poor Priest. Not only did the nerfs to all these other cards hurt Priest in being able to gain power by stealing other cards, but in all seriousness, Priest loses a lot. Now, Dragon Priest still survives in terms of it having most of its cards, but look at the changes here. You don't have Dark Cultist, so turn 3 is pretty dicey. You don't have Shrinkmeister, so you don't usually want to play turn 2 Shrinkmeister, but you can. Dragon Priest still has a turn 2 with Wormrest Agent, but then you lose Velen's Chosen as well. And I have won a number of Priest games early just by getting a Velen's Chosen on a 1 or 2 drop. So that is a huge change, but not as huge as Light Bomb, which Priest has an issue with an opponent that can load the board. Light Bomb was kind of your Swiss Army knife, one card, to really make a lot of matchups more manageable. Because what Priest has is one of two things. You have a lot of individual cards, like a Death, like Holy Fire, things that can deal with one card at a time. But you can't load up your deck with all of that, so Priest for a long time has had to rely on a bunch of different combos, most famously Alkanized Circle. But if you played Priest before Goblins versus Gnomes, you know the pain of turning on pass 1, 2, and 3, or passing on turns 1, 2, and 3, and hoping turn 4 that you get your Alkanized Circle, or else you outright lose the game. I think those days are coming again. Now, Priest did get some pretty decent class cards in this set, and I do think that there is some potential for Control Priest to still survive, because Entomb is still there, Elise is still there, Justicar is still around, so you can draw the game out. But Priest is going to have a really big problem getting overwhelmed, especially if the meta slows down a little bit. Now, Control Priest is supposed to... Hello, Miss Kitty. Control Priest is supposed to do really well in a slower meta, but without Light Bomb, it's entirely possible that your opponent just drops a bunch of bombs and you run out of resources to take care of them. And that's kind of the list there, and that's why Priest is down in the bottom. Do I hope to be wrong? Yes. Do I expect to be wrong? Unfortunately, no. So one more time, the list is Warrior number 1, Shaman number 2, Mage 3. I know, Miss Kitty. I know. It's all very exciting. This means I need to stop recording in a minute. Warrior 1, Shaman 2, Mage 3, Warlock 4, Hunter 5, Rogue 6, Druid 7, Paladin 8, Priest 9. Kitty, what do you think? Kitty's like, get me down right now. Well, that's it for this preview and catastrophe. Whispers of the Old Gods is out. Go, Kitty, I freaked you out enough. This is Asher. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time, where we will hopefully be having some fun and profit and who knows what else, playing with the new cards. Hopefully I'll see you in game. Take care.